The hall was a glittering display of wealth and celebration, crystal chandeliers casting soft, golden light over rows of guests dressed in their finest attire. Flowers lined the aisle in vibrant bouquets, and the faint scent of roses mixed with expensive perfume filled the air. Laughter and chatter buzzed like electricity as the ceremony drew to a close, everyone waiting for the bride and groom to exchange vows. She walked down the aisle in her pristine white gown, every step measured, graceful, as if floating above the polished marble floor. Her eyes sparkled with anticipation, a mix of nervousness and excitement, imagining the life she was about to begin with the man she thought loved her. The guests rose to their feet, smiles on their faces, applause rippling through the room as she approached the altar. He stood there, in a tailored black suit, his hand trembling slightly as he took hers. For a moment, everything seemed perfect, a scene straight out of a fairy tale, the kind people only read about in magazines or see in movies. But beneath his polished appearance, tension simmered. There was a look in his eyes, a coldness that had gone unnoticed by everyone except her closest friends, a flicker of something unspoken as the officiant began to speak, his voice echoing through the hall. She felt the weight of all eyes on them, the expectation, the pressure to appear as the perfect couple. She smiled, trying to mask the unease she felt as he squeezed her hand too tightly, a subtle warning she couldn't yet understand. The guests leaned forward in anticipation, the room alive with energy, the sound of soft music from the string quartet filling the pauses between words. Then, as he spoke his vows, a sudden shift occurred. His tone hardened, the warmth gone, replaced with something sharp, almost cruel. The words, meant to be tender and loving, came out laced with sarcasm and impatience. She blinked, confusion flickering across her face, unsure if she was mishearing, if the words were intended for her or just an awkward nervousness he couldn't contain. Without warning, in front of everyone, he struck her across the face. The sound of the slap cut through the room like a thunderclap, silencing the murmurs and music, leaving a heavy, suffocating pause that felt almost unbearable. Gasps erupted, hands flew to mouths, and a few guests instinctively jumped to their feet, unsure what to do. Time seemed to slow for her, the sharp sting spreading across her cheek, her vision blurring for a moment as shock took hold. Pain mingled with disbelief, a whirlwind of emotions she had never imagined facing, especially not here, in the midst of what was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. The groom's face was unreadable, calm in a way that sent chills down her spine, as if this act had been planned, calculated, expected. Some guests froze, paralyzed by the audacity. Others murmured indignantly, whispering behind hands, eyes darting between the couple, unable to believe what had just happened. The officiant faltered, unsure how to proceed, caught between the rules of ceremony and the moral imperative to intervene. For a moment, her mind blanked, stunned by the betrayal, by the public humiliation she endured. But within that moment of shock, a spark ignited. She felt something rise inside her, a fierce, uncontainable force she had never needed to summon before. She straightened her back, held her head high, and let the silence stretch. Every eye in the room was on her, and she realized the power she had in that instant was not in anger but in response, in dignity, in choosing how to define herself in the aftermath of cruelty. She looked directly at him, her eyes blazing with a fire that made his momentary bravado falter. The whispers of guests transformed into a tense quiet as everyone sensed a turning point, a moment when the story could shift, when the narrative of her humiliation could instead become a testament to resilience. Her voice broke the heavy silence, calm but cutting, echoing clearly throughout the hall. If this is how you treat me in front of those who were meant to witness our love, then I want nothing more to do with a man like you. Her words carried weight, each syllable deliberate, sharp, yet controlled, a declaration that stunned the room. The tremor of authority in her tone silenced even those who had intended to speak, leaving only the sound of her measured breathing and the soft rustle of her gown. The groom's expression shifted from anger to confusion, then disbelief, as if her courage had momentarily unbalanced him. The guests could feel the tension, the electric charge of confrontation, a collective realization that the story they were witnessing was no longer a traditional wedding scene. It had become a defining moment of character, a confrontation between cruelty and dignity. She let go of his hand, the gesture symbolic, final, and the simple act seemed monumental in its defiance. Stepping back, she turned toward the guests, her eyes meeting those of her family and friends, silently imploring them to witness her choice, that she would not be broken, that her worth was not defined by someone else's cruelty. A few supportive hands clutched each other nervously. Others looked on, unsure of how to respond, but unable to look away. Her mother's eyes glistened with pride and fear, while her friends tried to mask their shock with nods of encouragement. She knew the consequences of speaking up here, in front of everyone. Whispers, judgment, scandal, but the fire within her demanded truth over convenience, courage over fear. The groom opened his mouth, perhaps to justify himself, to reclaim control, but she didn't give him the chance. She lifted her chin, took a deep breath, and for the first time in the ceremony, the hall seemed to exhale with her. The music, timidly at first, resumed, as if the world itself acknowledged her defiance. She walked away from him, her steps deliberate, elegant, a silent proclamation of strength, while the murmurs of guests transformed into a mixture of awe, shock, and growing admiration. Her choice was simple yet revolutionary. She refused to accept violence as a part of love, and in that decision, she reclaimed not only herself but also the narrative of the day, turning it from a moment of humiliation into a powerful testament of courage. The hall remained frozen, the echoes of her words still hanging in the air like smoke after a fire. The groom stood there, stunned, as though the reality of her defiance had struck him physically. His hand twitched, then fell limply to his side, and for the first time, a flicker of fear crossed his face. Around him, guests whispered in shock, some shaking their heads, others exchanging glances that combined horror with admiration. No one expected the bride to react with such calm precision. Everyone had assumed she would either burst into tears or retreat, humiliated and silent. But here she was, radiant even in the aftermath of betrayal, her composure a challenge, a provocation, a lesson in courage that no one could ignore. The string quartet hesitated, their fingers hovering over their instruments, unsure if they should resume the music or let the moment stretch into eternity. Her friends rushed to her side, murmuring words of comfort, but she waved them off gently, needing space to assert herself fully. She turned to the guests, scanning the sea of faces, and saw the shock mirrored in their eyes, but also something else: respect, curiosity, even fear. The kind of respect that comes from witnessing someone claim their dignity, the kind that transforms spectators into allies without a single word spoken. A few of the older guests, men in suits and women in elegant gowns, exchanged looks that said plainly, "She is not one to be trifled with." The groom, still reeling, opened his mouth to speak, but the words caught in his throat, swallowed by the magnitude of her presence. He had imagined control, submission, compliance. He had never accounted for bravery, for the unexpected consequence of someone refusing to be a victim, not in private, not in public, not ever. Then came the murmurs, soft at first, spreading like a ripple across the room. "She stood up for herself," someone whispered. "I can't believe she did that." Another guest muttered, "I've never seen anyone act like that in front of everyone." These murmurs grew louder, more insistent, until the hall was alive again, but with a new energy, an energy that belonged to her, one she had reclaimed by simply refusing to accept abuse. Her parents' eyes met hers, wide with relief and awe, tears glinting at the corners. Her mother's hands shook slightly as she clutched her husband's arm, but the pride was undeniable. Her father nodded, a quiet signal of admiration and understanding. She had chosen herself, and that choice had been worth every risk. The groom finally spoke, his voice low, roughened with anger and disbelief. "How dare you humiliate me in front of everyone?" he snapped, taking a step toward her. But she didn't flinch. Her shoulders remained straight, her chin held high. "Humiliation isn't mine," she said, her voice firm, controlled. "It belongs to the person who believes hitting someone is acceptable, who believes fear is love." The room went silent again, hanging on her every word, captivated by the bravery she displayed, stunned by the clarity of her message. Every syllable was a challenge, a mirror held up to him, forcing him to confront his actions. Some guests shifted in their seats, uncomfortable with the tension but unable to tear their eyes away. The air was thick with anticipation, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. Whispers began to spread, some calling for security, others wondering whether the wedding would continue at all. But she ignored the chaos, her focus unshakable. This was her moment, not his. This was the time when she could redefine the story, take back the narrative that had been stolen by violence and fear. That a few bold voices rose from the crowd, supportive murmurs, small declarations that she was not alone. Her closest friends, some holding hands, some standing taller than before, echoed her courage with nods and soft affirmations. One brave guest, a woman she had grown up with, stepped forward, voice clear and unwavering. "She's right. No one deserves this. You should be ashamed." Gasps followed, but instead of retreating, she smiled faintly, a glimmer of satisfaction shining through the storm. She realized that in standing up, she had not only saved herself from further humiliation, but also inspired a room full of people to recognize wrongdoing and value courage over blind loyalty or fear. The groom's anger escalated, his face reddening, but his attempts to dominate the moment were failing. He was isolated, exposed, unmasked before everyone who had once admired him, feared him, or at least respected his wealth and power. She took a deep breath, steadying herself, and for the first time, she let herself imagine what freedom could feel like. Not just leaving him, but reclaiming her life, her voice, her autonomy. The thought filled her with a kind of power that was almost dizzying, the intoxicating knowledge that no one could take her dignity away unless she allowed it. Her decision was clear, inevitable. She stepped back, her gown flowing around her, each step deliberate, measured, a quiet but unyielding statement. "I will not stand here and pretend that this is love," she declared. "I will not let fear dictate my choices. This day is mine, and I choose to take it back." Every word carried authority, every gesture radiated confidence, and the room responded, subtly at first, then with rising support. Murmurs of approval, whispered encouragement, and the soft clapping of hands began to ripple through the hall, a wave of solidarity against cruelty. The groom froze, realizing his control was gone, that his act of violence had backfired spectacularly, transforming what he believed would be shame and submission into a moment of undeniable strength. He stepped back, uncertain, faltering, as if the ground beneath him had shifted. The guests looked on, eyes wide, hearts racing, recognizing that the story they had come to witness, a story of celebration and union, had transformed into a story of courage, resilience, and empowerment. She had turned humiliation into triumph, violence into revelation, fear into inspiration. And as she stood there, the room finally exhaling in collective acknowledgement, she felt something she hadn't anticipated, a profound sense of liberation. The wedding, once a stage for tragedy, had become a testament to her strength, a moment that would be remembered not for scandal, but for courage. The hall was quiet now, but the silence was different, charged, heavy, expectant. Everyone was still processing what had just unfolded, the tension settling into a kind of awe. The groom stood frozen near the altar, his face pale, hands shaking slightly as he realized that his attempt to dominate and humiliate had completely failed. The power dynamic had shifted irrevocably. He had imagined control, assumed fear would follow his violent act, but instead, the room had witnessed the birth of something unstoppable, her courage. She stood a few steps away, her chest lifted, her head held high, the soft shimmer of her gown catching the golden light as she moved with an elegance that defied the chaos around her. Her lips curved in a faint, knowing smile, not of triumph over him, but of liberation for herself. Guests began to murmur, their voices tentative at first, then steadily growing, a ripple of support spreading across the hall. Some approached her cautiously, offering whispered words of admiration and concern. Others simply watched, unsure whether to intervene or wait. It was a moment of collective realization. They were witnessing a woman claiming her dignity in front of the world, transforming what could have been a humiliating spectacle into an unforgettable lesson in strength. A few of her close friends moved closer, linking arms, offering protective presence, their eyes reflecting pride and relief. She felt the warmth of solidarity, a reassurance that she was not alone, that courage could inspire courage. The groom, meanwhile, tried to regain his composure. "This isn't over," he said, his voice trembling slightly despite his effort to sound commanding. "You can't just—" But she cut him off, her voice steady, unyielding. "It is over," she said clearly. "Not because of me, but because of what you showed yourself to be. Violence, fear, humiliation, those are not the foundations of love. You've lost more than control today. You've lost respect, dignity, and any claim to who I am." The words hit him harder than any slap ever could. The realization that everyone had seen him for who he truly was, a man blinded by ego and cruelty, settled over him like a cold shadow. She turned slowly, letting the silence stretch as she surveyed the room, meeting the eyes of every guest who had come expecting a fairy tale wedding. Some faces reflected shock, some pity, some guilt, and a few, surprisingly, admiration for the strength she displayed. She felt the weight of every gaze, and yet it was liberating rather than suffocating. Each eye that lingered on her told a story of recognition, that dignity and courage could triumph even in the most humiliating circumstances. Her parents, standing at the back, finally exhaled, tears streaming down their faces. Their daughter had not only survived an act of violence, but had done so with grace, intelligence, and unshakable strength that a few guests, emboldened by her actions, began to speak. Whispers turned into murmurs of support, which turned into clear declarations. "She's right," one man said, stepping forward. "No one should be treated this way." Another added, "This is bravery. This is strength." The atmosphere shifted completely. The scandal that could have ruined the day instead became a moment of inspiration, a turning point in the lives of everyone present. Even those who had been neutral observers felt compelled to take sides, not against her, but against the violence she had endured. The groom's attempts to retake control grew desperate. He moved closer, gesturing angrily, but every step he took seemed to push him further into isolation. His words, once sharp and commanding, now sounded hollow, empty of authority, and even a few of his closest friends exchanged uneasy glances. No one stepped to support him. The moment had clearly shifted. He had underestimated the power of someone refusing to be broken, someone daring to stand up in the face of shame and fear. Without a word, she walked past him, every step deliberate, a quiet defiance radiating from her every movement. She felt the cool weight of the aisle beneath her heels, each footfall echoing like a drumbeat of liberation. The guests instinctively stepped back, giving her space, sensing that this was more than just a walk. It was a statement, a reclaiming of her life, her story, her choice. As she reached the entrance, she paused and looked back one last time, her eyes locking with his. There was no fear, no pleading, no need for confrontation. Just a calm, unwavering strength that left him speechless and exposed in front of everyone. Outside, a car waited, a simple gesture of support arranged by her closest friends who had anticipated she might need it. She stepped in, the doors closing softly behind her, sealing the moment. The noise of the hall faded, replaced by the cool night air, the city lights twinkling like distant stars. For the first time that day, she allowed herself to breathe fully, to feel the weight of the day lift from her shoulders. She was free, not just from him, but from the expectations, the fear, the idea that she needed anyone else to define her worth. Inside the hall, the guests slowly recovered, murmurs of admiration growing louder. The wedding photographer, who had captured the moment, glanced down at his camera, realizing that he had not photographed a wedding but a moment of profound human courage. Conversations erupted, guests debating, analyzing, marveling at the strength she had displayed. Her name, whispered in reverence, spread through the room, her act of defiance becoming the story of the night. The tale everyone would remember far longer than the ceremony itself. By the time the event formally ended, the groom had slumped into a chair, pale and humbled, surrounded by silence where applause should have been. No one congratulated him. No one offered kind words. His isolation was complete, his shame public, his power gone. In contrast, she had stepped into the night, leaving behind a trail of inspiration, leaving behind the image of a woman who refused to accept abuse, who turned violence into a catalyst for strength, who reminded everyone present that dignity is never something to be compromised. And so, the wedding became a story retold countless times, not as a celebration of union, but as a testament to courage, resilience, and the power of standing up for oneself. What could have ended in humiliation had ended in triumph. And in the quiet of the night, she finally allowed herself to smile fully, knowing she had changed not just her life, but the lives of everyone who had witnessed her bravery.